Have you ever caught yourself saying, I don't feel like myself anymore? Well, I hear it all the time. It's actually one of the most common things I hear from people. And sometimes they whisper it. Sometimes they say it with frustration. Sometimes they say it with fear, even because they're actually concerned that something's wrong. And when I ask what they mean, the answer is actually very difficult to articulate. Nothing is necessarily wrong. Their life looks great. They look successful. Their relationships, they all are intact. They got stable relationships and their responsibilities haven't changed. Everything's all fine, but something feels different inside. The future that they were working toward, it doesn't feel compelling anymore. It's not drawing them. The routines that they once enjoyed, they feel empty. And the things that they actually used to care about, they don't seem to matter in the same way. And because they can't explain it, they often assume something is actually wrong with them. And today I want to explore a different possibility. What if you don't feel like yourself anymore because you're actually changing? Even though everything in your life looks the same, you're actually changing. What if the version of you that built you and built this current life that you have isn't exactly the same as the person that's living in the life today? I'm Heather Grzych. I'm an author, an Ayurvedic practitioner, and I'm the host of the Wisdom of the Body podcast. Thank you for being here. Today, we're going to talk about what happens when the map that you've been using no longer fits the territory that you're walking through. So, I've been thinking about Dante Alighieri, a lot lately, and the famous Italian poet and writer. And the Divine Comedy, which is this epic poem that he did, the first line of this work, this poem is midway. Well, this is translated from Italian, right? So, midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself in a forest dark. So, midway through the journey of life, he finds himself in a dark wood. I've always loved that image. Have you ever been in a dark wood? There's a lot of images that come from different cultures about people being in darkness, right? Without the clarity. There's images of people going into the underworld. There's images from literature, people going into dark spaces, and there's a lot of interesting metaphors that we see in literature about dark places. So, in this case, Dante is not at the beginning of his life and he's not at the end of his life. I mean, cool that he knows that, right? He's in the middle. And what strikes me is not that he's not lost because he's weak. He isn't lost because he's lazy. And he isn't lost because he made some kind of, error, some type of catastrophic mistake. He's lost because the map that guided him no longer works. And you might notice that his works often have a person guiding him through realms, right? So Beatrice, Virgil, if you've ever read any of his works, there's always a person who's guiding him, right? Or some entity is always guiding him through various realms. And I think many people experience this feeling that their map no longer works. And it's kind of existential. So Ebenezer Scrooge, when he went through this in, A Christmas Carol, he went through it as a very dramatic crisis and had these, ghosts that came to take him through his learning journey. And, sometimes we do have an event or even an epiphany that will change things for us. And, it feels very significant and dramatic, this change that we're going through. But many others actually go through this as a quiet realization. Like you wake up one day and you notice something's shifted and the goals that once motivated you, they don't have the same pull. The future that you imagine, it doesn't have this like sparkly attraction the way that it used to, or maybe the identity that you've been carrying for years, it starts to feel like a little too small or shaped in the wrong way. And if it happens without any other big drama, like if it's just a quiet whisper, It's not coming with a big event. So if it's just quietly happening in you, you think, well, why don't I feel like myself anymore? And I think the mistake that many of us make is assuming that when we grow, we should feel good. I can't tell you how many yoga classes I've been into where the goal is like feeling good and bliss and all this stuff. That's wonderful. I love yoga. I taught yoga for many years, but we imagine that growth feels good. We imagine it that it feels inspiring. We imagine that it feels clear. And we imagine that it feels purposeful, like juiced up. But growth often feels very confusing, and it requires that we leave something behind. It's, we don't get to take everything with us all the time. I have these recurring dreams that I'm carrying garbage bags full of clothing. It's such a great metaphor, but we go through life and we think we're just supposed to take everything with us all the time. And sometimes you do have to leave parts of you behind when you change. Maybe that's an old belief. Maybe that's an old dream. Maybe that's an old identity. Gosh, imagine if you were a famous person and you wanted to change, but everyone knows you as this. How horrible, right? And then all of a sudden they're mad at you that you're different now because they know you as this. So these older versions of ourselves, when we have to move on from them, there's oftentimes a grief that comes with that, even when the change is positive. So it's not like the change isn't good, but it can feel kind of painful and uncomfortable. So one of the things I love about nature is that nature's never in a hurry, okay? It just does things on its own pace, right? So a plant, it doesn't grow every part of itself at once. Like it's got the foundation for everything in its seed, right? And it sort of gets activated at different stages and depending on what's going on in the environment around us. And first the roots will develop, then it'll be the stem, then the leaves, the flowers, and the fruit. And each stage that this plant is growing in, it creates the conditions for the next, right? So I'm using my hands to kind of simulate this growth in stages. But imagine if a plant judged itself the way people do. Imagine if it said, I don't have flowers yet. I don't have fruit yet. I must be failing. I mean, nature understands that, this thing that we forget as humans, that growth is sequential. One thing develops, so another thing can develop. Roots, hey, they come before fruit. Sorry, got to get the roots. You want the fruit, you got to get the roots. So often the most important growth is the part that nobody can see. And I think human beings are the same. Sometimes your values change before your circumstances do. Sometimes your body changes before your decisions do. Sometimes your priorities shift before your life actually reflects them. And that can create a very uncomfortable gap. You feel different, but your life still looks the same. And I've seen this with clients for years. Maybe a woman who spent and I've been through it myself, So a woman who has spent decades building a career suddenly finds herself questioning what success actually means. Or a man who always wanted more achievement, like suddenly longs for more connection. Yeah, men want connection too. Or someone who has spent years trying to become a parent finds themselves wondering who they are outside of that pursuit. People often think they're lost, but many are not lost. They're just transitioning from one version of themselves to the other version. And the challenge is that transitions, they don't announce themselves, right? Nobody sends a letter saying, hey, congratulations, you're entering a new chapter. Most of the time, you recognize the transition only in hindsight. And you're like, oh, I get why okay. So when everything's said and done, you look back and you go, now I get it. Oh, okay. So let's pause for a moment. Notice your body and feel the flesh of your body just being supported. This flesh of your body that's animated by your spirit, animated by your energy, your soul. Notice this just being supported by whatever you're sitting on or wherever you're standing on. And notice your breath. No need to change it. Just notice it comes in and out of your nose, maybe in and out of your mouth, but even better if it comes in and out of your nose. Belly might move when you breathe. Your chest might move when you breathe. Just notice that first. And then ask yourself, hey, what have I been trying to get back to? What have I been trying to reform myself back into? And who have I been trying to become again? Who have I been trying to become again that I already was? And is it possible that that version of me served its purpose? Take a breath. Simply notice what arises. There's a quote from Ram Dass that I return to often. The real work you have to do is in the privacy of your own heart. I love that so much because so much of modern life will pull us outward, make us get more information, more content, more opinions, more advice, more noise. And yet there are some questions that just cannot be answered outside. They have to come from the inside. These questions require us to sit quietly and listen. Not for certainty and not for instructions, but for honesty. Because the real work actually happens when no one's watching you, when there's no audience, when there's no performance, when we're simply willing to just be present with what is true. So tuning into the heart in a moment like this, before we close, I just would love to invite you to a brief practice, a heart meditation. So if you could bring your attention into your chest. So first you're going to notice your physical body first, right? Your muscles, your bones, all that. You can put your hand on your heart if you want. So you've got this rib cage. It protects your organs underneath. Your lungs, as you breathe, they're expanding and contracting. Your heart, you probably feel it's beating continuously, whether you think about it or not, which is so amazing. The rise and fall of your breath, the subtle movement of your chest wall as it comes in and out with the breath, and maybe even the warmth of your hand if you've placed it there. Now allow your awareness to expand more broadly. So beyond anatomy and beyond structure and toward the experience of your heart, the energy of your heart, the feeling of that energy. And you can imagine a soft green light in the center of your chest. And you're not going to force anything. You're just going to imagine that light growing with each breath. And it's expanding through the front of the body. And it's expanding through the back of the body. And it's creating space. And it's creating openness. And when you get that openness, now imagine a garden. It's a garden that blooms at specific times. Some seasons are for flowering, some seasons are for rooting, and some seasons are for rest. And all of them belong. And as you breathe, you ask yourself, what is growing in me right now? What is growing in me? Not what should be growing, not what I wish were growing. Stay with that question for a while. What is growing in me right now? Stay with that question for a few breaths. Notice what emerges. So if you have been wondering why you don't feel like yourself anymore, Perhaps the answer isn't that you've lost yourself. Perhaps it's that you've outgrown an older version of yourself. And perhaps you're standing where Dante stood in a dark wood, not because you failed. No, not because you failed, but because the map that brought you to this moment is no longer the map that you need for what comes next. And maybe, just maybe, something important is growing beneath the surface that really matters, that's really beautiful, and will allow the full expression of you and your soul to come forth. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Wisdom of the Body. And until next time, take very good care of yourself. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. Visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.